Eric was saying the art
Great
side was
again.
so easy. The art side's so easy for Eric because he was just downloading everything.
Yeah. Don't waste any time.
It's art, man. Art's easy. Yeah, because you're just thumbing through
my God.
SketchUp warehouse.
Today we're going to be talking about this debate going on between Shane Davis and Eric July about the quantity versus quality in comics. So Eric July has mentioned before that to him, the hard part of creating comics isn't so much, putting the pen to the paper and drawing the characters, but that it's the business aspect of things. Now, there are some artists who argue that Eric July doesn't understand the genesis of ideas and that his artist was actually cutting some very major corners. So they're basically arguing that Eric July has a very low quality of his comic books. Conversely, Eric July believes that these people don't have a business sense and that they're taking way too long to create their books and that they need to increase their output, that their quantity needs to be higher. Now, this debate is hardly a new one. This has been going on for a while now, but I'd say that it was sort of laid to rest, but I guess you could say Eric sort of reopened the wound, if you will. And he did that with this post right here. Now, it's a little long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to leave it up, so if you want, you can pause the video and read it yourself. Otherwise, I'm just going to give a brief summary. Essentially, he's saying that a lot of times people like to argue that they have an increased quality. That way they could basically make an excuse for being late and not satisfying the needs of the customer, and because it's a means of basically masking that they're lazy and unprofessional. And he argues that this isn't really an argument of quality versus quantity, but it's about professionalism, drive, ambition, and work ethic. So basically he's saying that there isn't a differentiation between the amount of quality in his comics as others. Because if you have professionalism, drive, ambition, and work ethic, then that just means that you're going to have an increased amount of things being released on a certain release schedule. So he says it's not about quality versus quantity, but it is, because he's talking about having a regular release schedule. And also he mentions how, comic legends would produce things, extremely quickly, but they would make some very memorable stuff. So it is about quality versus quantity. And then he says, the unprofessional spends 5 years missing all deadlines, producing 1 or 2 books. Okay, so now he's kind of, taking shots directly at specific people. Most notably, of course, Ethan Van Sciver. Now that we heard Eric's side of the story, I think we should take a quick listen to how Shane Davis slaps back.
Eric July in the crowdfunding scene. I'm not really going to say anything positive or negative about him or his books, but it's starting to become up on a topic of him. This isn't about quality versus quantity. It's about professionalism, drive, ambition, and work ethic. I could argue as an artist, all of those things, work ethic, ambition, drive, professionalism, could be a guy that spends a week on a page and it looks like God level artwork. I would say that's Travis Charest. I would say it's ambiguous depending on what it is. Now, should a page take a week? Depends on what's on the page, depends on how important the book is. There's a lot of factors here. Or you could say these things are about stacking that paper. How many books a year can you put out? And personally, this is where it hits crowdfunding. I think I heard Perch talk something about it too, about that lateness hurting crowdfunding. Is when I'm making a book, I'm competing with all the great books in the past that Marvel and DC have done. Because me as a customer, I'm buying omnibus, I'm buying some manga, I'm buying what is good and what's coming out. And that's it. If it's not good, I'm not buying it. It doesn't matter how quick it comes out. At the American comic book industry, and everybody's talking about it, what's wrong with it? With a million YouTube channels where there's thinking Critical, Perch, Ethan Van Sciver, your boy Zach. What does it take to fix it? Okay, like we've all evaluated it. We've all checked the oil, the check engine lights on the fucking American comic book industry. We've all gotten our faces pushed in the mud by manga. But what does it take to fix it? Is it putting out monthly books? I don't know, because Marvel and DC hasn't stopped doing that for years and it's still going down. I don't think quantity is the answer. Now, somebody's going to say, but Shane, you could do both. Both have happened, and there's very few comic creators that can do both. I'll be honest with you. Brian Azzarello's only ever written X amount of books per month. Jeff Johns, the same. Some of these guys tap out at a certain point because their egos say, yeah, I could write an extra book a month at DC, but the reality is either my life's going to be hell or my quality's going to suffer. You're going to have to turn loose of something. And some guys are just like, their egos like, no, my books are this quality no matter what. And I don't know, with all the buying options for any consumer right now, I feel like we have to make books that matter. I really do. I think we have to make quality books. Now, does that mean that one day I couldn't just flip off of YouTube and quit YouTube completely and I could stamp out like 8 crowdfunded books a year? Sure. But who's going to advertise it? Who's going to market it? Who's going to tell people and show people why they should care?
We're going to look at some previous controversies, and I guess you could say some internet history about this whole situation. Because as I said, this has really been going on for a long time, the debate between quantity versus quality. And then I'm going to weigh in. This isn't something I've really weighed in on before. Now, I have been documenting, the back and forth of Eric July and, Ethan Van Sciver and other people. But I haven't really talked about how I feel about this situation. So this video isn't really so much of a reporting video as most of my content has been, but I'm going to be weighing in and giving my commentary and my opinions. Now, I do find it a little interesting here that Shane mentioned Brian Azzarello and Jeff Johns as people who have been able to create some really amazing work quickly because, both of them are obviously writers. And there is something to note that, if you're just writing a comic, it's going to take you significantly less time than it would for an artist to draw it. Now, the most important point that Shane mentions is that you can't beat Marvel and DC in terms of quantity. They've been publishing monthlies for decades now, and they have the process very refined. They're essentially a mill. They're also backed by millions and millions of dollars of funding. So why would a customer want to spend $35 a month on a comic book just because it's a small publishing company, when he could go to a comic book shop and spend just a tenth of that for a floppy? You see, there already are monthly comics being produced. Interestingly, Eric actually is thinking of doing a monthly schedule now in the upcoming year. What I really love about this back and forth between Eric July and Shane Davis is it reminds me of Jules Verne's masterpiece Around the World in 80 Days. Eric is taking on the role of Phineas Fogg, who bet £20,000, roughly $2.3 million in our modern money, that he could circumnavigate the Earth in less than 3 months. Now, the stakes in this scenario are actually significantly higher. Eric isn't just betting $2.3 million. The cost alone for his first book were already over $1.35 million. Of course, many of these costs were fixed, but I think we might be looking at least a $5 or $7 million bet. Now, if Eric wins, that means he'll end up earning a profit, and if he loses, that means he'll get a loss. I remember a now deleted community post about a year ago, it was in December of 2023, when Eric July mentioned that he actually hadn't made a dime from selling his comics yet. Maybe he's learned something we don't know, and if he can properly scale his business, he'll rake in some massive success. Now, this debate of quantity versus quality has been happening for a really long time now, and one of the biggest controversies that Eric has had is the amount of 3D assets in his book. And one of my favorite parts is actually also this image right here where you see Isom sleeping on a couch, but his leg is propped up in a way that defies gravity. Now, that's because the artist basically just imported this, most likely from some other part in the book, and then he maybe drew on top of it, or he maybe even just left it as it is, which is possible too, because, the colorist, Gabe El-Taib, isn't working with the Rippaverse anymore, and that raises a lot of questions. Maybe was it because he was aiding and abetting his artist? Now, the reason why I find this really interesting is because Eric actually didn't notice that his artist was doing stuff like this. Let me play this clip for you right here.
The word that non-playable characters got in a recent update is 3D assets. This is in reference to certain background elements in ISOM being referenced and or traced. Did I know anything about this? No, and neither did most of you.
Now, Eric wasn't aware that his artist was cutting corners, and some of you guys might say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was, because Eric actually said that he was going to make it not happen anymore. So that means that Eric actually didn't like that his artist was doing that, but he didn't even know it was happening until someone pointed it out. Now, something else that I find really interesting too is this isn't the first time he's had a quality issue. Some of you guys might remember Yaira, and he had some preview pages for that in ISOM 2. And if you just look at it, there were some very big anatomical issues, like Yaira turns her head so far that her neck wouldn't have been able to support that, like she's basically just an owl here. This anatomical issue is something a lot of people were laughing about, and Eric said, no, that's not even an image for my book. So he wasn't aware that this was actually something inside of his book. That's how unaware of his art he is, or he was lying about it. You can pick which one, he is. Is he incompetent and he isn't even sure what is in his book and like what he's advertising as upcoming pages? Or is he aware his art sucked and he's trying to cover his tracks? You can pick between these two options. Which one do you think is more likely? Now, I cover this all in a separate video called Yairo Winter, so if you want to see that clip of, Eric freaking out and saying, that's not a real page, go ahead and stick to the end of the video. I'm going to have a link there for it. Now that we're on the topic of Yairo Winter, there's something important I really want to talk about. So with regards to Eric talking about quantity versus quality and on-time books, I actually don't think he has a leg to stand on. Now this is my hot take of the day, and a lot of you guys might be very visceral about my belief in this, but I believe that most of Eric's books haven't been made on time. Now to understand what I mean, let's just take a quick look at the main slogan he was using when he was advertising his comic Yaira. He kept saying, "Winter is here."
Winter is here.
This live-action trailer was made before Yaira even launched, and it was released on March 11th, 2024. So to keep that in perspective, most people don't think of March as winter. Most people actually think of it as spring. Sure, technically on a calendar, it is considered winter, but my point is that he was most likely trying to have this released in either December or January. At the end of 2023, Eric was saying we would likely have 6 books this year. So far, we've only had 4. The Horseman was supposed to come out in summer of this year. The campaign didn't go live till September 16th. Now some of you guys might still say, hey JJ, mid-September is still summer. Technically it's still fall. Winter doesn't start till December 21st. So I guess if you have autism though, you can still call it autumn if you like. But I don't know anyone who doesn't consider December 1st winter. Now of course by the time Eric actually launches his campaign and gives you an estimated delivery date, his estimates aren't too off. We can see that the internal release schedule that he has isn't working out quite right. He keeps thinking things will be ready before they are, but I don't think that this is the best example of him not understanding the creative process. There are way more obvious things that show that he's totally oblivious to the genesis of great art. He didn't even know which pages he was previewing at the end of ISOM 2, and he was unaware of that page's gross anatomical errors. He also wasn't happy his artist was using lots of 3D assets, but that went over his head until somebody else pointed it out. Now externally it might seem that Eric is this master of getting things finished on time and being able to manage these products, but that's simply just because he doesn't tell you about the product until he finishes it. Once you examine his internal plans of when he believes that everything will be finished and ready to go, he's usually a few months off. Not to mention he overestimated his capacity of finished books by 33%. And this isn't just with regards to his comic books either. He did the same thing with his summer merchandise line. He made a line of tank tops and shorts. It was called the Summer Collection. Again, if you have autism, you can still pretend that makes sense. Now, who do I think will win this bet? The Cat Pappy Shane Davis or the Black Stan Lee Eric July? I'm going to have to go with Shane on this. Last year, Eric said he was going to make half of the books that he's going to this upcoming year. So if Eric couldn't even meet the 6-book deadline in a year, I don't think he's going to be able to meet 12. I also don't think that trying to beat DC and Marvel with quantity is going to work, because they've been trying that for years and things haven't been going well for them. And honestly, if it's just quantity you're after, you can get a much better deal at DC and Marvel. It was kind of like when the American revolutionaries were trying to beat the British by fighting in the same methods that they did, but they realized that marching in lines wasn't going to cut it. The British Empire had an indispensable amount of funds and resources, something that they couldn't compete with, so they had to develop new tactics. And I think that in this case, the new tactics is quality, good stories, and a lovable brand that fans will want to stick to through the years. What's most important to you as a customer, quantity or quality? Let me know in the comments section and I'll be glad to hear what you have to say. Anyway, thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and I'll see you around.